Yeah, I've just crossed over the bridge. It says Most Poivestanki, whatever. And I'm looking for the PL Boheter Ghetto. That's the plaque or place, plaza in other words. So just straight ahead, I guess, somewhere kind of maybe. Now, 68 years later, these new buildings, and I don't know how much of what's here was a remnant. I don't know where the outline of the ghetto over here was. Another new building. My guess is that I'm going to walk down through that area. At least that's where I'm going. Okay, we're now at that plaza, and I'll just pan around. And what we'll be looking for first is the pharmacy under the Eagle. Here I think is some kind of a memorial to that ghetto and the Jewish forced migration into it, with these symbolic chairs. They're currently cleaning them off, steam cleaning. This is the pharmacy under the Eagle, and the story behind it is that a Jewish pharmacist asked the Nazis, and ironically gained permission, to operate a pharmacy here during that ghetto period. So this was inside the ghetto. Apparently the owner also wrote a book called The Pharmacy Under the Ghetto. Just some notes as I pan these photographs. It started in 1909 to 1967, believe it or not. And Tadeusz Pancific was a graduate of the university. Remember, many of those who were killed off, if they were Jewish, was allowed to set this up, even though the Germans didn't want him to. They offered him a pharmacy outside the ghetto in Krakow, and he refused. And he was able to, with his open-mindedness and righteousness and high personal culture, he won the acceptance and respect among inhabitants of the ghetto. Soon it was a meeting point for Jewish intellectuals, scientists, and artists who were systematically being tried and killed off also. And he provided the residents with various means of medications which would help to avoid deportation, including hair dyes to make them look younger, luminol to calm down the children hidden in shelters or smuggled outside the ghetto. Apparently there was a bloody deportation action on Zogny Square in 1942 for which they dressed wounds and provide medications free of charge. Hidden hiding places in the pharmacies protected some. Valuable mementos and so forth were deposited here for safety. It was kind of analogous to the Black Underground, except that it was not a long-distance chain, but rather a site for all of the strategies that would protect some people. Happier days. And the man himself. What a tribute to be trusted by people so much in danger. One photograph of the people moving across the bridge. A deportation train. It's interesting that you look at these pictures, they don't look any more onerous or ominous than would those of a policeman asking for documents in the United States. It's a question of with what authority and from what does that authority spring? A dictatorial government or a democratic government? If you were a Jew, this is a sign that confronted you outside your ghetto, if you were outside. Notice in the background all of the stuff that's just thrown there. Probably belongings they think they're taking with them to wherever they're being forced to go. Imagine if you had to pack up your belongings and just a few things that you could carry. What was she wondering about the photographer? What did the photographer think about what he was doing? Here, loaded onto boxcars, as tight as they could get them, many died en route from the cold. Hypothermia. Imagine what you did when you had to go to the bathroom. You just went. There was no choice. Imagine when someone fell, too weak to stand. Probably forced labor. This is an example of the detailed, anal, German, precise lists. Here are pictures of people moving their stuff across that bridge. Here we're moving across the railroad bridge. Okay, the ghetto, and I'll show you a drawing in a couple minutes, but it ran roughly from the river right around here like this, and then I think up around here like this, forming kind of a triangle. And here you see it, the river's going up on top there. There's the bridge coming down there, right up in there. And there's the railroad over there. Here they are building the walls to wall themselves in. Coming across the bridge in the winter time. Here are the sides of buildings like I saw in Warsaw being bricked up so that there's no access visually or in fact by the Jews to the Aryan area. This what now is an iconic picture of the goods left behind by the people who were being deported and just simply couldn't carry them all. These scenes are very well illustrated in The Pianist. This, I think, is a justifiable slur against foreign media. Eyes that can't see, ears that can't hear, a mouth that won't speak. Entrance through the gate. Exit through the chimney. Here's a bit of cynicism on my daily bread lend me, my Lord, even on credit. Dear God, have you ever gone hungry? As entitled Incredible Heroism of SS Men. An interesting old building in this part of town, about the only interesting old building. I find that little deck rather quaint. Notice it's not restored by the city of Krakow or the country Poland. Here are those last remains of the wall in this very nice little park off the main drag, which interestingly enough are some men here who are practicing their climbing skills on this sheer rock face. I noticed that in finding this wall, there is no indication at all on the street or in this entryway that this is where one of the few remaining chunks of the ghetto wall is. Even when you look at the guidebook, it's very misleading. The Rick Steves, it says it's along this road here. Well, what the hell does that mean? If it weren't for researching a Google map, I wouldn't have a clue. You'd sure not get it from either the Polish government, the city of Krakow, or Rick Steves' guidebook. See, over there is the entrance to it, and there's the street that I'm going to take this way and angle off to my left, and I should run into the neighborhood of the factory. Here, a dismal gray street with very communist type of separation. Here looks like another chunk of ghetto wall going in roughly the same direction. Whether it is or not, I don't know. Here is a funky old building set back in. I don't know what the... This old building might have had a pretty facade at one time. Notice there a little statue in there. Just barely make it out. Probably Mary. And then some of the detail. We'll look at some that's in pretty good shape. Okay, I'm at that little street right above the 38, says Kingi or something like that. And I'm going to angle up and pick up the Browskiego, take it to the right till I find Tadeusz Romanowskiska, and that should bring me up into somewhere where my Google map should show me Schindler's. I'm walking under the railroad bridge, and I'll hang a left here and should encounter Tadeusz Romanowski's street. Eureka and Shazam, I'm underneath the bridge, and there's my street. We go to the left. Okay, we should be at that little V in the street going pretty much north, slightly east. That's Tadeuszko, whatever his name is. And now up into here is where I want to get for the Schindler. Okay, on that building way up ahead is the name Telpod, which I believe was the name of the factory that was, Schindler's factory was renamed at a later time. So I found the right street. Now I need to find Lipova number 4. Okay, this is the correct address, number 4. And here there are some of those tourist noisemakers. He's just turned off his. Again, the essence of being in this nicely painted building, which I'm sure is done solely to make it more presentable for tourists. The important thing about being here is the charisma of place. To have understood and tried to understand what Oskar Schindler did for the Jews that he protected here. It's only fitting that men like him, or women, who have done such a great thing for people so selflessly, should somehow be honored. Notice that this is put up not by the city of Krakow, not by the country of Poland, but by the Jewish community of Krakow and students and faculty of Albion College, Michigan, the United States of America. Can you imagine those who came here and saw this entryway, if in fact it was the original entryway, and realized that they had a chance of being saved from that which by then they knew was death, and a horrible, ignominious death. Closed today, Monday, but this is a picture from the internet of the original staircase inside the factory that was used in the movie. This place has been prettied up so much, I would wonder why just not looking at the movie isn't the better approach. There's some footage inside the factory because they opened up the door for a moment. gentleman who's the manager showed me the staircase. You can see that it's been cleaned up a lot. But this is where it was in the movie. Whether this was old or not, I don't know. You see the old buildings. A tree would have stood here that they would have known, I would imagine. What solace working here each day must have given those folks. This gentleman here was nice enough to let me in, which another guidebook had referred to as a possibility to continue on walking, which others have already started to do. How much of this existed then is, of course, a good question, because what you try to do here is think to yourself that those prisoners, those workers here, touched these doors, cleaned these windows. They didn't walk this sidewalk, it's too new. They would have worked inside this space. Again, it's charisma of place. There's nothing exciting about this. You have to imagine what you're seeing here and what was here once before. What was that hole for? Were those fans original? Was this door original? Can't see much with this, I'm sure. Again, an original door. I can imagine Oscar Schindler driving down the street looking at these two trees when they were younger, and trees, and seeing these other buildings. I can imagine how much fear he must have had and how much great cool he must have had to control that fear. It's one thing to be courageous and fearless on your own behalf, but when you're doing it for others, not even of your religion, just out of human compassion, something I don't have to that depth, maybe others do. Certainly a hero of monumental proportion. Schindler's building down there on the left. I was noting to myself that in the last 8 months I have stood next to the grave site, if you will, the fire pyre of the bones of Julius Caesar, but I have not been as much impressed as I am in the charisma place to stand and walk through part of Schindler's building. I'm standing at the current Krakow train stop, and there is the bridge that crosses the river for the trains, and if the pictures are interpreted correctly by me, people use the train bridge also to pull their stuff across. And here, 68 years later, some modern development going in here. Don't know whether it's Polish money or EU money or perhaps Norwegian money, but a good size either residential or office building, can't tell, but it could be very pretty. Here in the Jewish section, the 2 or 3 prominent sites with English translations at the bottom. I'd love to see more of that. Notice the richness rather than gaudy or the wall decorations. Extremely tasteful. When you can imagine doing this in your home. think I'm getting that one right down there. The one right in the middle. I think that's got chicken in it. So this is what it is. It's chicken plus some other stuff on this long chunk of baguette, 1/2. And it's very popular, as you can see, and it comes in all kinds of things, ingredients and different add-ons. So it's very good, and I think there's some mushroom in it. I have no idea what the sauce is underneath, but there's some mustard on it, not harsh mustard. Very, very good. Very nice crispy bread. There's some tourists on a bike tour. Oh, the way to die. It's a Monday, so things are relatively quiet compared to what it would have been like yesterday. Now the way to eat this is very simple. You just keep pushing it down the trough with your other hand. So as I eat more on this end, I just push on the other end. So you just order up there and you pay, and you back off so that other people can order, and then he gives you a holler when he's got yours ready. This old brick building has a date up there of 1886. So here I am at Auschwitz. Almost 50 years ago, I sat in the library at the United States Air Force Academy and spent several hours reading about Auschwitz. It just intrigued me. Don't know whether I'd searched it out or run across the book or whatever. I've read about it, seen videos of it, talked to students about it in history classes, and pondered all the issues that such a place necessarily spawns. And so here we are. Apparently Poles come here in the early years of their schooling, and then just before the end of high school again, plus tour groups, of course. Okay, we're now inside at the gate entrance to Auschwitz. This is the famous entrance. As I recall, you normally saw this entrance down a long railway or roadway, which would have been behind me. The famous saying there is, "Work will set you free." These buildings, I'm guessing from older pictures, represent new buildings. This is a drawing reflecting the band that played when the prisoners marched. This is either a reconstruction or part of the existing fence at the time. Some of the camps had 3 such fences. The electricity powerful enough to kill any animal that touched it, reputedly. And then the guard towers, whether those are original, I don't know. Okay, we're standing right now right where the 2 is, right above my thumb at the lower left. And that is, we're inside the camp now, standing next to this first building here on the left. And here a sign indicates that at this spot, corpses of prisoners shot while trying to escape were displayed to warn other prisoners. Presumably all these buildings are the remains of, and are the barracks of Auschwitz. Didn't realize they were this well constructed. It's on this spot that the camp orchestra had to assemble to play marches while the prisoners filed past. This was to help keep them in step so they were easier to count. Would remind you of the first day at military school or military induction for anybody throughout the world, if its intent and purpose were not so evil. Apparently, if a prisoner did escape from this house of horrors, their family was then arrested and brought here and made to stand under a sign indicating why they were arrested. These interpretive signs are really just an encapsulation of some of the most specific of things. This camp was established in '41 for Soviet prisoners of war, about 10,000 of them actually. Most died of hunger, hard work, SS brutality. This was a place known for its almost unbridled cruelty, experimentation and so forth. If the prisoners did not want to work, they were forced out of their blocks, there was these buildings, in the freezing weather, and then doused with water, whereupon they, of course, died from hypothermia. Each morning they were made to stand for about an hour and a half for what was called roll call. It was also at this time that they ferreted out those who were too weak to do much, and then there was usually some kind of special entertainment for them. I don't know yet what these low buildings were for, nor what that kiosk was for, if it's original. I'm standing about where my fingernail is, looking at that entryway, and in front of that little entryway there where my fingernail is where that little key. So these little kiosks were where the SS Gestapo men stood in inclement weather to take the roll call. There's a bell in that upper portion, perhaps was rung when people were able to return to their barracks. Right now it seems so tranquil, almost like it's an abandoned residential area. People are away on a holiday or something. Was there green grass here at the time? Doubtful. Trees? Doubtful. And for me, there's a certain poignancy in that this security man, unarmed, casually dressed in his summer outfit, walking through this place that used to be the Gestapo control. So in this area here where the roll call was conducted, if anyone was missing, then the prisoners still had to stand until the Gestapo had satisfied their records, and their records were meticulous. Sometimes the sign indicates 12 hours. Public hangings also took place here, perhaps on a gibbet like this reconstructed one. At one time, I think 12 Poles were hung here. Their crime having supposedly assisted 3 others in escaping. These were photographs. These are photographs of some of the prisoners who were hung on these gallows. Kitchener, in his book on Poland, describes one perhaps fictitious prisoner, a professor, who describes to another professor the strategy that you must use to survive. And he summed it in 2 words: moral hibernation. In other words, you have to suspend any moral issues, either that you have with the guards, that you have with other prisoners, that you have with the God that you supposedly believe in, that's supposed to be protecting all these people who believe in him. These were heavy cement rollers, probably with wooden handles. You can see they're broken off, that were probably used by the prisoners to level out the walkways or driveways. I'm looking in a room where there is a movie showing, not the one I'm going to go see in a few minutes, but I believe it's a video of the whether they're entering the camp or just being assembled in Krakow, I don't know. Notice that they're forced to walk with their hands up. Just probably part of the intimidation and humiliation since they're unarmed. I think this is a tribute to the Hungarian deportation specifically. Simulation of a boxcar. Listen to the heartbeat. Insides of the barracks. This shows men and women in columns of 5. Here, after the women have been selected and shaven and put into uniforms, the men stripped of their clothes, put into uniforms and shaven. Here it illustrates their containers of the poison. These are the gas chambers. These are corpses in the large ghetto of Budapest. This woman on the left before her arrest in Budapest, and this picture of her after her liberation. Margit Schwartz. I wonder if there's any internet reference to her. I'm going to try a slightly different strategy to, at least for a few minutes, stay ahead of the hordes and go down to the last building in reverse direction. This is block 11, and next to it is the execution courtyard. Whether these coverings were original or not, I don't know, or what their purpose was, if they were some kind of memorial at the end. I keep looking in the walls for evidence of bullet holes, but I don't see it. And did these stairs have some special significance? Is this the way that some people were taken into this execution area? We think of Ted Bundy and Starkweather and other mass or serial killers, I should say, and ooh and ah, and try to analyze them mentally. What do you say of the men, many, hundreds if not thousands, of SS Gestapo, who every day got quite used to killing, brutalizing, torturing human being after human being after human? Makes the proverbial kid in the classroom tearing the wings off of flies seem like a rather nice little kid. Here are wooden buildings. Don't know if they were new or existing. Were these mess halls or something? How could you escape with two heavily electrified walls then one very high wall, electrified at the top. How did you escape? That certainly would make for interesting stories. And all of this spotlighted and presumably controlled by German Shepherd guarded dogs and Gestapos. Here in Death Block 11, from which no one left alive, in room 5, 3 level bunks, 3 people to each bunk. They had to sleep on their sides so they could fit. Death required a trial, sham trial lasting 2 minutes. In room 6, people undressed before execution. And then the starvation cell number 18 held prisoners selected to starve to death when a fellow prisoner escaped. Here's Maximilian Kolbe spent 2 weeks here to save a man's life. The dark cell number 20 held up to 30 people, had only a small window for ventilation, and if it became covered with snow, the prisoner suffocated. Cell 21 at the end, a prisoner scratched a crucifix, the image of Jesus on the right, crucifix on the left. The standing cells 22, 4 people would be forced to stand together for hours at a time. Here are the women stripped before execution, then led in twos to the yard and shot at the death wall. If this room could speak its emotion. Notice the bathroom is next, because the last thing apparently a human being loses in the way of control is bowel movements. Here in this room, the men stripped. And some executions took place here also. Notice the shower. What an irony. This room dedicated to some of the resistance groups within the camps. Incredible heroes. Notice that those are prisoners overseeing others, raising the fascinating question, do you collaborate or do you die? That's what those window coverings are for. Here's the torture by broomstick, if you can figure. Yeah, I guess we can see how that works. Buildings 19 and 20 and 21 were designated as the infirmary for sick prisoners. It was also thought by the prisoners as the crematorium waiting room. For whatever reason, they even imagined an infirmary. It ended up being a place for bizarre experiments that the Reich wanted to do. Mengele and his evil associates. Those that did not appear to be capable of surviving and perhaps being used in work camps were just given lethal injections. Current issue since the war has been, should the world use the results of these experiments? In some instances they might have been useful, or they might be useful information. And the moral issue is, do we use what was taken by force and torture and try to use it for the benefit of mankind? This is the room in which they would put people in just that little bit of window there, and if it got covered with snow, they all suffocated. These are covered with pictures of those who died here. Here a little memorial left for one person remembered. Notice that there is a stove here, whether they were provided fuel or not. They just slept on the floor here. But then to add more prisoners, you added cots. Washrooms. Reconstructed interior of a brick barracks. More than 700 prisoners in each one. So this is what it looked like. You've seen pictures of this. Sometimes the beds were made with wire, barbed wire. These were the original latrines. You can just imagine the foul stench of death and that. So that was Block 7 we were just in. That footage is of the living conditions. And Block 6 contains everyday life simulations. There's not much here that you can't gain from books or other videos that I already had. Interestingly enough, 500 children were saved. This may be that group, many because they were twins, and Mengele wanted to do his experiment on identical twins. That was Block 6. Go to Block 5 for the evidence of crimes. Just for curiosity's sake, I'm at the back here, right between these two, 5 and 6. And back here is a fire brigade reservoir built in the form of a swimming pool in early 1944. This was one of 3 camps that were associated here: Auschwitz, Birkenau, that I'll go to after I'm done here, and then the third, which was a factory for the exploitation of slave labor. I wonder, of all the SS soldiers who participated in this, in all of the concentration camps or similar installations, how many of them were basically free to live normal lives after the war? A normal life, believe it or not, underwritten by the United States and the Allies. Here in number 5. There are 40,000 pairs of shoes in here. This is supposedly extermination information. You're not supposed to use cameras here, but it's not because it's a museum, but it's because tourists stopping to take pictures slows up the line. But you can see that what slows up the line is the line. So there's the entrance gate. More crowds coming. And it's been set up here so that each building holds one discrete bit of exhibits, many of them not very interesting at all, and most of which you can get from books or videos, even better, with far more detail. But it's a good way of spreading out the massive amount of tourists that come here. And this is May. We haven't hit June or the summer when it's really been. I'm going to purposely wander away from where all the tourists are, just in the hopes that I will see something different, or nothing else, feel something different. But it's doubtful. It's all the same. It's interesting to wonder what this is. These are certainly chimneys for something that has the look of an oven, but I don't really know what it is, and it's not described anywhere. I'm going to sit on the steps here by myself and eat some M&Ms. These quiet moments I relish. I like the hour and a half I spent at the Pyramid of the Moon in Mexico, outside of Mexico City in Teotihuacan. I sit here hoping somehow whatever is the essence here will magically impregnate itself in me. Maybe I just want to eat some M&Ms. In spite of what the former U.S. soldier told me when I flew into Berlin with him almost 40 years ago, that the Americans could have done the same if we had suffered the humiliating defeat of World War I. But I cannot believe that. Nor can I believe the French would do it. Nor the Brits. To put people in an internment camp like we did the Japanese, okay, we did that. But that was a humane experience, illegal as hell perhaps, necessarily justified by our fear, but it wasn't it wasn't done with the intention of extermination or brutalizing or even of humiliating, although it did. What is interesting is the growing awareness that I'm getting of the role that a fairly significant number of Polish people contributed to the demise of the Jews. And quite willingly, call them collaborators, call them whatever you like. And that there most certainly appears to have been very much a compliance of spirit, if you will, by the Poles who were very prejudiced apparently against the Jews. Adam Casimir Kotorski. My M&M resting spot, and now I'm walking up along the side to access to where the crematorium was. Okay, we're looking down between these two electrified gates, and in the movie that we saw, it shows people who were finally freed exiting through some portion of this double fence. And here ahead of us. So it's on this spot that in this area where the Gestapo was located, but prisoners suspected of involvement in camp's underground resistance movement or preparing to escape were interrogated here. Many prisoners died as a result of being beaten or tortured. This is interesting. The first commandant of Auschwitz, Rudolf Höss, was tried and sentenced to death after the war by the Polish Supreme National Tribunal and was hanged here on the 16th April 1947. My question, how many others escaped with impunity? We're walking now around the crematorium. Not much to be said when you're standing on a spot like this. This building, of all these kinds of buildings, probably is the greatest single focal point of the horror of the final solution. In this quiet countryside, some early part of the 40s, 41, 42, the Germans built Birkenau, which was the I think, the primary extermination camp. And this view of the train approaching this tower, for those who could have seen it, which they couldn't, they were in boxcars, would have been a horrifying sight. Just the fact I knew they were going was horrifying. I'm just going to pan down through this legend for the map. Immediately after arriving inside the gate, they were separated into groups, those who were healthy enough to work, those who were not, and to be immediately sent to the gas chamber. Forget which movies illustrate this best, but it may be The Pianist, it may be Schindler's List, but several movies have. To say the least, this huge site is emasculated, and necessarily so. We probably should be grateful that it was preserved at all. This is a photograph of camp prisoners excavating this ditch off to the side that runs along the fence line. It'd be interesting to know whether they flooded that gate. Well, this is a picture of the camp as it was. Off to the left, most of the buildings, which all were of wood, did not remain. I don't know whether these are reconstructed or just a few that did, but off in the distance you can see a forest of chimneys, and that's what remains. It's interesting that they apparently chose to have just one electrified fence around. Maybe they weren't going to keep them that long. It wasn't necessary to have three. Here's a sense of how this might have looked. These were heated. I pumped air through them, probably from a stove down there, but it was very inadequate, particularly given that these are just thin boards, and you can see where the eaves are open. So you can see that there was an oven here, and then an oven way down at that end. Not much to see any further, I don't think. Although there are some people coming out of some of those buildings, so I'll go walk down there and see what it is. How these ditches were used is an interesting question. It wouldn't be for sewage, because the Germans were far too persnickety for that, if for no other reason than to protect themselves. Again, the peacefulness of my little jaunt so belies the horror of this place. The human mind can't wrap itself around the magnitude of this. I wonder if Himmler and his henchmen in their hateful rage had some concept, Himmler, who could have traveled and did, to probably all of his camps. Did he have some sense of the magnitude of what he was achieving, quote unquote? Can you imagine if Hitler's 1,000-year Reich that he had planned and envisioned lasted only 100 years? What would he have done to the rest of the world? Certainly yellow has to be worse than the Jewish people from his viewpoint. Here my guess is they've taken all the bricks that for some reason had fallen down. Maybe everything did, and stacked them in the middle here, so someday if they have the need they can rebuild this. But what's the need? One or two buildings and you've seen it all. Imagine how lives played out in this place. Every step I take, another life, times 3, times all those who spent their time here month after month. What were those upright pegs for? And what were those rings for? looks like slave ships, where you run chains through the prisoners' manacles and then through there. I imagine the men would have gotten straw or grass and brought it in, plugged up all the holes they could. How much of the urine, the sweat, the feces, the blood of human beings is in this dirt? The literature says that in some instances, cholera, plagues, and other diseases would rage through, killing maybe 5,000-6,000 at a time. No idea what that building was for. All these buildings were reconstructed after the war from original materials. The Nazis destroyed some of the buildings at the end when they were about to be liberated, and apparently wood over time has been taken for firewood, etc. I'm going to walk back up along the fence line here. Were I a Gestapo, this would have been my view, except that there would have been completed buildings there and the prisoners. And you wonder what these cement posts are for. Wonder what the noise level was like and what the sounds were like. I bet many of these bricks were taken by people locally to build homes. Notice how far back those chimneys reach. Way back to the tower, way there in the center. Now you'll notice that here there's a perimeter fence, but then behind this block of reconstructed buildings is another fence, and then there are 2 blocks of buildings, 2 rows, and then another fence. So all of this was broken up into subsections, each of them fenced. I suppose if you could get this far, and depending upon what was kept in those ditches, you might just be able to dig your way safely deep enough underneath this fence line. And maybe there were even strategies for neutralizing the fence line, like pieces of wood or something. Imagine the workers who installed this, the man who installed that very bolt 68 years ago. What did he think he was doing? Did he have a moral hibernation? Here on this post is a piece of metal sticking out with a hole in it. Perhaps it just anchored in another wire, maybe electrified. But the Germans allow prisoners to maintain the fence under supervision. And if they did, was that an opportunity to sabotage the fence a bit? At least enough. Here's some more post hardware. Looks like that's a bracket that where it's straightened out, it would hold a beam horizontally. I wonder if this was designed to carry away the excrement that went into it, or did it just sit here and eventually rot out? The Germans would seem to be too persnickety to allow that to happen. Now once inside the gate, the train continued directly down these tracks to the loading platforms, which are down, I guess, where that wide area is. And again, this is best seen in Schindler's List. There were studies done by a woman, I believe, in the 19th century on how cattle react slaughterhouses before they're killed. And she was able ultimately to argue forcefully enough against such a cruelty that they were suffering as to, and she did propose strategies that the slaughterhouses could use to decrease, believe it or not, the anguish and the fear of the cattle. Imagine as you came in here and you could see out the slats of your boxcar, perhaps, and you could see this forest of buildings, these lights, these electric fences, and all the stories you'd heard before if you'd not been in such a place were realized. What would have been your emotion? Individually, in mass? I've always been angered watching cowboys at the rodeo jab bulls and horses and so forth who are already frightened by the cacophony and frenzy of the place. They jab them with long poles to get them to move in certain places, and I think how terrible that is, and what a partial indictment it is of those who claim to be such great heroes of the West. This is not a monument, I don't think, but rather a power box. So right here was the gravel dividing platform. A Nazi doctor would stand facing the guard tower and evaluate each prisoner. If he pointed to the right, the prisoner was sentenced to death and trudged unknowingly to the gas chamber. If he pointed to the left, the person would be targeted to live a little longer. It was here that families from all over Europe were torn apart forever. Jews selected for immediate gas chamber deaths were funneled down this road that I'll pan into in a moment. And there would have been some little narrow gauge railroad apparently. Don't know what these two buildings were for. But after a Nazi doctor died of typhus, they realized they needed to clean things up, and so they got running water into the buildings. A mother unknowingly herding her children to their death. And you wonder if some of the people who were brought here on trains, once they got off, did they have a moment when they looked back? Okay, in this photo we're looking at Jews who are being herded alongside the road to my right. There's that building that you see in the photo is the building behind here. And down there apparently is where the gas chambers are. So there was no time to be wasted. Photos taken by the SS in 1944. Here at the point where the doctor is dividing them, I guess. Many of these buildings were stone or brick. Right there in the background you can see that others were of wood. Even along this road, the ditches are deep and steep. Perhaps to intimidate, certainly to stop any of those who wanted to run back to their loved ones, for example, or to foolishly think they could somehow escape. Imagine this. No grass, all mud, dirt. Probably very few trees, if any. Smell of the smoke from the crematorium, what was that like? Don't you imagine that occasionally civilians snuck up along the fence, or at least close enough to the fence, where they could see something happening? A fire. Reservoir. It has steps there to get down and do whatever they would think of doing there. Probably very steep walls. And a frog, can you believe it? Here is the memorial. Interesting that it's the same dark color as the gravestones at the German Memorial and Cemetery in Normandy. I'll read this plaque in English. Forever let this place be a cry of despair and a warning to humanity, where the Nazis murdered about 1.5 million men, women, and children, mainly Jews, from various countries of Europe. Auschwitz, Birkenau, 1940, 1945. Why, I asked, did they leave out the name German? Poignantly, this monument is raised up in a series of steps, but the integrity of the view of the or the fence posts is maintained. This is all that remains of the crematorium. The Germans operated it from June 43 to November 44. Towards the end of the war, the SS began to dismantle it to remove the evidence of their atrocities. And on January 20th, 1945, dynamite was used to try to totally destroy it. What it looked like. These are a few Jewish women and children deported from Hungary en route, literally minutes from now, in this photograph to the chambers. What did you think, old woman, at this time? Could you have imagined the horror that was awaiting you? Okay, as I focus on this map of what the building was, A is the entrance to the underground hall where victims had to undress before entering the gas chamber. C, underground dressing room. D, underground gas chamber. E, hatches through which pellets producing Zyklon B gas were poured. F, hall containing 5 crematorium incinerators. G, the chimney. H, crucible for melting gold extracted from teeth. I, incinerator used for burning personal documents taken from Jews sent to be murdered in the gas chamber. J, area strewn with ashes of the people murdered. And K, gate to the gas chamber and crematorium compound, which was isolated from the rest of the camp. No artist could create a more touching memorial. Down there, the underground dressing chamber. Here you can see the limits of this part of the compound, sectioned off from the rest of the compound. Somewhere over in this area here, people undressed in the open to go downstairs, unless they were, for some reason, allowed to go downstairs and undress. I think the walls had hooks in them to hang clothing on. That may be what that is. The gas chamber over there behind the curtain. And then the ovens somewhere underneath that rubble. And the green area beyond, where ashes are. Some concentration camps use the ashes as fertilizer. And here the monument seen from the end. I wonder if it was intended to look so black and ominous. And I wonder what all the jumbledness is supposed to represent. I'm thinking that each of those plaques is the same message in all of the languages of the people who were affected, and hopefully the Japanese, since they did similar things without the extermination precision, but the same idea to the Chinese before the Second World War. The rape of Nanking, I believe. Here are the French, perhaps the Greek. And this companion installation, for the same purpose, perhaps same design. If the stones could talk. Interesting how tenuous that one block of brick and mortar looks, hanging by what appear to be threads, slightly balanced, symbolic of the peace of the world. I don't know what these structures were, except they look like cups, so that the diameter gets smaller as it goes down. Maybe they were water reservoirs of some sort. Perhaps a shower, but there's no drain. No, it's just another stall. Here, a stove. Opening for the stove. Who knows what this elongated room was for? Perhaps the same thing. Just two sets built in. Thinking that this brick wall probably formed a wall in which heat went down it. I'm guessing. I don't know. It may just be a simple separation wall. But it ties into that stove. What once was mud, now green grass. I'm guessing the roofs were all restored. If there's any value in walking through like I'm doing now, it's to get a little bit better sense of the immensity of this project. A city that held 100,000 people at a time. Almost all of them were destined to die. This building's a little bit different. It has two rooms here as you enter, and I believe these were for the guards. The floor was utilized, but it was for the newcomers. Notice these nicks in the boards. If they're original, they represented something. An idle scratching. Being shoved into it, perhaps. What did the weak do to get up on top? Was there plaster along these bricks? Were they all smoothed off like this wall? I don't know. Here's someone who's written never again. And yet it goes on and on and on. Man is evil, and given license, he will do it again. Is the salt from the urine of these men embedded in these stones? Could a scientist find it? Determine DNA, diseases, and so forth? I don't know. As I walked around, I could see that here there's a difference. Here, two buildings have a walled-in area between them. Did it serve a particular function? Maybe this interpretive sign can tell us. So these were special quarantine barracks for people who were too sick to do any work, and yet for some reason they didn't want them to infect the general prisoner population, so they were held here until they could be exterminated in the chambers. I wonder what this building is for with all of these chimneys. You know, we attached to the Germans, and did after the war, a capacity for great, skilled, precise manufacturing at that time of technology until the Japanese took over. Why can we not attach other attributes to them? Now this had an even more specific purpose than the other one. This was for those who were found to be particularly dangerous to the Third Reich, who were thought to be participating in the camp's underground movement or planned to escape. So here they were kept in isolation. Conditions in this unit were extremely harsh. Punishments were severe, workloads murderous, food rations reduced, all leading to a high mortality rate. Maybe the purpose of these ovens was just to create a greater heat in the initial design, and then perhaps they abandoned that greater effort. Here's an old wagon, but I'm betting they didn't use horses to pull it. This is interesting because there are these large vats. What were they used for? This memorial in French seems to say, to the memory of the French patriot assassins for the Hitlerians in the camp. In other words, French who assassinated Germans. I believe I've seen documentaries where Americans who were interred in these camps were brought back to their particular camp to give their reflections. It was, to say the least, poignant, moving. Here it looks like the guards' room had the luxury of a wooden floor.